that's similar to saying, like, does the internet replace a lawyer? Right? It's like, no, right?
No.
Does it elevate what a good lawyer is? And do sometimes customers walk in with like bad legal advice from the internet, and a lawyer has to right. show their value by saying what you read is wrong, and here's how you should think about that? Yeah. But it elevates the profession, and I think that's what the internet and the mobile phone and now generative AI are doing to the real estate industry.
You talk about it privately, we talk about it publicly. This is the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered podcast. Welcome again to the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered podcast. I'm your host, Dwiggy Dwiggins, along with Mr. Keith Robinson. So
someday
Keith,
that won't be funny, but it is still
someday it won't,
funny.
but it still is. Mr. Keith Robinson, we were doing a live podcast, and the Pacific Gas and Electric Company here in the state of California decided to cut my power. Yeah. So we got right to the end. So everybody knows these are live podcasts that we record, and sometimes shit happens. So I will be there until about 95% of it, and then Keith takes over just to prerequisite to it.
I get the reins to the pod by myself.
But we had Mr. Jeremy Wacksman, the new CEO of Zillow Group, on our pod to talk about a lot of stuff. Like, give us a quick background on it.
Yeah, so, he talked about the Zillow super app, what it is and why it's important. He talked about his vision for home buying in the future, what it might look like, the tension between trying to serve the industry and trying to serve the buyer at the same time for Zillow, and a whole bunch of other stuff. He's someone who doesn't do it.
Policy.
Yep. And he's
which is where I got cut off. Yeah,
that's right. And he's someone who doesn't do a ton of interviews. So it was really good to get to hear from him and have him share his insights and belief modality about technology, the industry, the consumer, and how it all fits together. It's a great conversation. You're going to dig it. Put it in your ears, kids.
Jeremy, welcome to the podcast. We are very excited to have you on the show. So much. Well, actually, there's really nothing going on in residential real estate again.
Nope. Nothing to talk about.
No specific topics that are lingering on the headlines. And we certainly want to talk about some of those today, but you're new in your role there, the new role there. So, but I thought it'd be better for you just to kind of talk about your background, because if I have my stats correctly, you've been at Zillow for 16 years and the technology sector since 1999, if I've got that right. This is what your LinkedIn profile said. So, give us your background, just real quick for viewers and listeners. You started in tech, kind of some of the roles you did, then Zillow, and then how you ended up as the new CEO of the company.
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Of course.
And quick background on me. 14 years at Zillow.
14. Okay.
Yeah. Started my career as an engineer, got my computer engineering degree. Thought I wanted to be a software engineer and quickly realized I wasn't going to be good at it, and also just wasn't as passionate about it, and found my way into product and marketing early. Marketing is what got me out to Seattle. I worked for Microsoft for a few years, and that's how I met Rich Barton, our co-founder, and the team back in 2009, coming out of the global financial crisis and worst housing crash we've ever seen. Thought it'd be a really good idea to go work for a not yet profitable real estate startup. But honestly, I mean, I tell that in jest because for me, it was about the team. And this team had obsessed and focused on consumer and customer problems and solving problems with technology, which really spoke to me. It's kind of how I built my career, was trying to figure out how to solve and delight consumers. And that got me here in 2009. And that's really kept me here ever since. Obviously at Zillow, I've worn a bunch of hats. I came to really work on marketing and product. That quickly turned into helping pivot the company to mobile. I think 6 months after I got here, the App Store launched on the iPhone, and we realized that, wow, that was going to be the way real estate and categories like ours went. And so I got to work on that. I got to build the brand as chief marketing officer. And then for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been working across our business lines, and then most recently as chief operating officer. And so, I woke up one day and I've been here 14 years. But it's really, it's been a different job all the time. But I think the common through line, not just for me, but for us as a company, is just trying to work backwards from what does that buyer and seller want, and how can we actually delight them in this category the way that our phones are delighting us in all the other categories we use it for.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to ask this, so I'm going to preface this real quick before we'll dive into some rapid fires. I have always admired Rich Barton. He's just, every time I've seen him speak or I've had a cocktail with him and talked, he just sees the world through a lens that I just very few people do. What's it like to work with him? Just somebody who's like so visionary, obviously from Microsoft and then Expedia. Microsoft Expedia, did I get that right? And then Zillow. Yeah. I mean, just what's that like to work with somebody who just is on that Elon Musk sort of level?
Rich and Lloyd Frank, our co-founder. And honestly, a lot of the founding team that I still get to work with today, David Bytel, our CTO, and a bunch of other folks, when you spend that much time together, I think you have two things. I think one, you have a lot of trust in each other, which you need through ebbs and flows of business challenges. It's what gets you to lean forward and take big risks. If you've listened to Rich, he talks a lot about taking big swings, and you can't innovate without failing. So you have to try things that aren't going to work. And so you need trust in a team to get that. And I think Rich and Lloyd really built a culture here that created an environment where people are comfortable and confident in taking swings, all in service of the second piece, which is the long-term success of the consumer, the customer we ultimately serve, right? The thinking in the future and taking a long-term view on how do we actually get to the right end state versus being stuck in what's today's problem or tomorrow's problem. I think those are the two things. I think creating a culture of trust and safety to take these big swings and keeping our eyes downfield, I would say, are the two things that Rich really embodies, but I think Lloyd and the rest of the team does too. And I think it comes from them all having worked together for so long.
That's really cool to have a team that just sees things in that view, and then has the ability to take those risks too. There's as you know, there's millions of great ideas, but it takes a really strong team to execute, because ideas are a dime a dozen, execution's the key in all of that. So we'll do a couple rapid fires. This is just to get everybody to know you personally real quick. I'll start with the first. We have a link on our website for our pod that's all the book recommendations or podcast recommendations that everybody's listening to. So what is your favorite book now, ever, podcast now, ever, one of the two that you would love to share for people to go check out?
I mean, right now, I think my answer would be Stratechery, the podcast, which Ben Thompson, he does a daily email, and then a bunch of it's in podcast form, and the long form stuff is in podcast form, which I listen to on my walks. And it's just such a great strategy snack. Like, Ben covers all industries across tech, and he brings a strategic framework to think about how to analyze what someone or some company's doing. And so it's a great lift up and learn about something else, not in my day to day, that I find myself, I read it every day, and I find myself listening to a bunch.
That's awesome. His email newsletter is worth signing up for.
Yeah, it is.
Regardless of what you do. It is. I don't get to read it as much as I like, but that's a really good call out. Like, that's solid. Matter of fact, I mean, he's not paying us, but we can link to his sign up in case people want.
I'm sure he'd appreciate it.
Yeah. And then maybe he'll bread us out later. Okay. This follow up rapid fire question is: if you could have lunch with one person, current or historical, who would it be and why?
Ooh. I mean, my head immediately went to Neil Armstrong.
That's a solid one.
The reason why is, I mean, a combo of, I was a kid during the Challenger tragedy. And so, the space race was history lesson, but then space exploration was like clear and present. And then I went to Purdue, and the cradle of astronauts and just the history of all the astronauts that went through Purdue just made me fascinated with, space exploration and our progress there. So it'd be fascinating to sit down with him and get to hear what that was like.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah,
that's a good one. We haven't had anybody say that before. We've actually had some really good ones recently that people have thrown out, and not to mention the timing with Elon Musk and all of his craziness. I mean, watching that video was wild. That just you thought it was a movie. You're like going, that's Hollywood, and you're going, no, that actually happened. He caught the damn rocket booster. Like, what the. I saw someone say Elon Musk is out here catching rockets with chopsticks, and I can't get my phone to sync to my car.
Even just landing a reusable rocket on a platform just a few years ago was the same. Oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that, and now it's just expected that that's now we can just have reusable rockets.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna dive into questions real quick. Bottom on your left hand side over your shoulder, what is that for the viewers? I'm looking on your shelf there. Tell me the story. That F1 car.
Yeah, it's like half in frame, I guess.
Yeah.
That is the Mercedes F1 Lego car, which was COVID. COVID got us into doing Lego kits here and there as a family. And I'm a huge F1 fan. And so when they had that one come out, it was like the perfect marriage of let me work on that with the kids. And then
That's
I was like,
awesome.
I have to display it. So
That's our headline.
Awesome.
CEO of Zillow does Lego.
That was when
right
Lewis
there.
Hamilton was winning, by the way, just for add context. All right, let's dive in. We only have so much time with you, and we'll have a lot of subjects to talk about. First of all, I know for just going back with the headlines with Rich while he was CEO, he kept talking a lot about the Zillow Super App. They give us a little context on that and sort of where you guys are. Because I know I'm going to have some follow-ups on some acquisitions and things you guys are doing. So kind of give us sort of lay of the land on where you are in that process, what it is, and your goals with it.
Yeah, the housing super app, something we talk about a lot at Zillow. That's the Zillow app for a buyer and a seller. And we use the term super app to mean bringing a lot of disparate services together in one app. That's really what a super app is in other parts of the world, because that, as you all know, and your listeners know, that is what the real estate transaction is. It is a complex set of disparate services. But what does the buyer want or the seller want? They want a one-stop shop, right? They want to be able to open the app and kind of do everything from start to finish inside that app, have it notify them, have it stay really transparent, be in control, do things digitally. That's the vision. So we use the super app construct to really encapsulate all that vision. And that's what we're building. That's here today, and it's getting better all the time. We started with things like digitizing touring, right? Being able to take a virtual tour, being able to book a real-time tour, being able to get financing digitally and keep up with your affordability. Now starting to be able to message your Premier agent or a loan officer all inside the app. And, eventually it'll get all the way to closing and being able to go from start to finish all in the app. So that's what the super app is. That's what our strategy is. It's digitizing the transaction, building this integrated experience so that a buyer or a seller can buy or sell easier, right? The reason for the why is, as you all know, and as your listeners know, this category is really hard and really complex.
Friction.
And, most people get very stressed out. Many people abandon the transaction, right? We don't get as many moves as we could because of how hard it is. And so that's what we're after. We're after trying to make moving easier.
You have this, so the idea is obviously all the different services creating a much more seamless experience. Do you have any thoughts about where that goes long term? Because there's a lot of companies that are trying to hit this, like Keith and I kind of frame it as the life cycle of home ownership. I bought the house, and now I have this property that I'm going to own for 8 to 13 years. Is the evolution potentially going down that road where the buyer now is obviously an owner, is managing that asset, and then everything related to that? Is that part of the overall strategy with the super app too?
Maybe eventually, but I think right now it's really about trying to build a better real estate transaction.
The
transaction itself.
There's enough work there.
The transaction itself, I think we survey consumers, we talk to consumers all the time, and we do a big broad-based quant study of, trends and sentiment. And I'm always struck by, there's a stat in there that about half of buyers cry at some point during the process. Which is just such a great encapsulation of everything your listeners know about how hard this is. And by the way, how hard it is for agents to get those customers across the finish line.
I was going to say about half of agents cry in a transaction every time too. So but you're right.
That,
I mean,
that shows how much there is to do in the transaction itself to unlock getting it done for more people. And so that's why that's such our focus right now. It's such a big, hairy problem. We'll never say never to more fun things down the road, but that's our focus for right now.
And it is the consumer's been, the human being who buys and sells houses who've been asking for this for decades. I mean, decades. I remember 25 years ago hearing about, one-stop shop and everything under one roof. And it feels like you're trying to digitize that, right? Like, so instead of being under one roof like we used to 25 years ago, it's more about the roof is your phone, right? And how much of it can we digitally manifest and create this sort of single place where we can clear everything.
Yes, I think, the roof is your phone, and what outsiders to our industry don't understand in that construct is the buyer will stay inside an app like Zillow, but they will work with their agent who is an entrepreneur who works for their own business. And then they and their agent will coordinate at an arm's length with other professionals on the other side of the transaction and in the transaction itself. And so this complex project management of a bunch of parties all need to come together to enable that one-stop shop. And that's the software that we're after. And that's why we're so focused on not just software for the buyer and the seller, and not just tech for that person to work with we call them premier agents that work with Zillow customers, but software for all agents and all teams to bring that transaction online and make it more digital.
So you've had an approach of obviously building some of it, acquiring some of it. So it has some historical, I think what Dotloop was one of the first that you guys acquired, showing time, follow-up boss, so components for the agents to, manage this process better. And then recently, VSAI. Tell us a little bit about that acquisition and then the strategy for that.
Yeah, VSAI is short for Virtual Staging AI, and that's really what it is. It's a great young company that has innovated a way to do virtual staging, and that's, as you outlined, another example of us enabling the real estate industry to become more digital, more integrated, more productive. If I think about, we've been working on something we call Listing Showcase for a while now.
Yeah,
it's now out there and getting broader and broader adoption. And what that really is, for those who are listening who don't know, it's really a next generation listing, right? If listings for a long time were N photos and a text description,
right?
Well, what does a seller want to market their home? And more so, what does a buyer want to be able to get a sense of a home? They want to be able to really virtually tour from their phone or from their laptop. And that requires generative AI, that requires a floor plan, that requires the ability to do a walkthrough, which sounds fantastic. But you have to be able to enable that experience with the tech and tools that a real estate photographer does today, right? With efficient kind of, moderate hardware, 360 cameras or your iPhone, can you generate an experience like that? And so we've been working hard on software to create that. Now a photographer can go out and shoot a home the way you would shoot a listing, and we can generate a listing showcase listing off of that. And so virtual staging is another example of that. Well, in that listing, shouldn't you be able to do some virtual staging of the room if that's how, if we can capture the media to do that? So that to us is just another example of how do we get the tech in the hands of not just even the real estate agents, but their photographers, so that we can meet the needs of what the buyer and the seller are going to want. Because as soon as you see a showcase listing or an interactive floor plan where the photos are actually oriented on the floor plan, you look at that and you're like, well, I don't want to go back to the 25 photos in a light box. Like that's what I want on all my listings.
Right. Yeah. Keith and I do a lot of keynotes together on this subject, and it drives us nuts. When we talk to people about, it's something like, and you would know the stat better than we would, Jeremy, but something like less than 30% of listings have a floor plan on them. Yeah, and it's like the second or third most requested thing by buyers. And Keith and I look at property all the time. We're always looking to, buy a house if we wanted to, and or another house, I should say. And we're like, and you get these photos and you're like, I don't know where any of this is. Yeah. Like it's stupid. It's like, I've got all these great photos, but I have no context. Is this the first, second, third floor? Where am I looking? And it drives me completely nuts. I have a question that's related to this. If you think about that experience, you've got this ability to, which I'm assuming is part of your vision, for somebody to be able to see the house. The seller loves their shag rug from the 70s, but it's a shag rug from the 70s. Virtually staging it allows you to see what the house could potentially look like, so a better idea on selling it. Do you think there's a world where you guys have the ability for, through machine learning and everything else to be able to look at it and go, this is the house currently today. This is the type of marble in the kitchen, or it's linoleum. Here's the approximate cost you could spend to remodel this place, and then the up-leg value of this home. I mean, are we going to get to a spot where we're looking at this not only visually, but like from an economic perspective? I'm forecasting here, but like, I don't know, I'm throwing it out.
Maybe. I mean, back to your question on how do we think about homeownership versus the transaction? I think there's a lot of interesting use cases for virtual staging. And we at Zillow have played around in the past with ways to improve our estimate, right? Our
Right.
AVM.
Yeah.
And can we give it content that helps make it more accurate? And so you could imagine a cost and ROI of renovations. There's a use case for the homeowner, as you outlined. There's also a use case for the appraiser or the buyer and seller to try and figure out the market rate for the home itself. So I think I hear your question, and I think, yes, tech can get into some of those things eventually. But to me, that's all about getting more rich content, and getting that content and that data can help all make us more accurate and can provide more transparency. Because at the end of the day, this marketplace is really opaque, and price discovery is really opaque in this marketplace.
Yeah.
Even with all the work that agents do to try and get to good price discovery. So can data help that? I would hope so.
Yeah, I think, James, to nerd out on that for 2 seconds, yes, the answer, in my opinion, not you didn't ask me, but I'm going to answer it, is definitely yes. In fact, there's a company called Inspectify. Jeremy, if you go buy it, I'd love a commission. There's a company called Inspectify that is ingesting thousands and thousands of home inspection reports, and then also thousands and thousands of bids correlated with those home inspection reports. And then they can forecast, just because they have so much massive data, that they can actually forecast what a potential repair in a given geography might be, because it's different in Kansas City, Kansas than it might be in San Francisco, California. So I think we're not far from that specific use case that you talked about.
And another one we've worked on, the latest version of ours estimate, it's actually powered by neural networks, and it can, in air quotes, see. Like it's not just comps. We actually feed it images to help it start to get a little bit more accurate, especially when a property comes on market and we actually have a bunch of great rich media. So I think you think into the future and what generative AI can potentially do, and you think about the data that will help make everyone make a better decision. And we really are just at the early days, scratching the surface.
Yeah. I have another sort of, I don't know, vision casting far out kind of question, if that's okay.
Sure.
I really think when I see and experience what you all are doing, you're trying to get as far into the home as humanly possible at a distance, right? So that a buyer can have as deeply a contextual experience digitally as they can with the home, right? Like walking it without walking it. Yep. How far does that go? Like someday is it just going to be people are going to look at 2 houses instead of 15 because they've gotten so good at thin slicing the information and the data down? Or like how do you see that expand? And when you think about that, what do you think?
Yeah. People, I think, often ask will this just make the consumer more efficient? And the answer is yes, but maybe not how you asked it, right? It's not, they're going to take less tours. I actually think what happens is they take more tours. They spend more time. Like we find anytime you give consumers more tools, they become more empowered and become more efficient. But that efficiency doesn't mean they spend less time dreaming and shopping. They actually spend more time. They just spend it at a higher fidelity. They're more productive, right? So what that means is today, when someone books a real-time tour on Zillow, they're a higher intent lead for the agent. They've already maybe done a little more window shopping. They're more empowered. So when they meet the agent, they're a little more ready to go. And
they're DIYing themselves down the funnel, right?
Exactly. They're DIYing themselves down the funnel, and they're not spending less time. I mean, that's the thing about this category. I think we all know people love to dream and shop. This is the biggest purchase that everyone makes. And as James said, it's 8 to 13 years. So you as a consumer are going to obsess over it. And if we can make you more efficient in how you spend your shopping time, it doesn't mean you're going to spend less time. You're actually probably going to spend the same amount of time or even more. You're just
also everybody's nosy as shit. So like everybody wants to see like houses when it comes on. What's my neighbor's house is for sale? Like, I mean, it's a good comment.
My mom is almost 75 and she has no intention of moving ever. But man, she loves your website, boy. And she spends a lot of time on it. And so there is that voyeuristic nature of real estate that is such an alluring draw. Yeah.
I want to ask this. And that's how people turn into transactions, by the way. So maybe your example is not a good one, but
for sure.
People who ended up buying are not necessarily the ones who thought they were going to buy when they started. And they fall in love with something and then they want to talk to an agent about can they get it done, and that's how the shopping process starts. So giving the consumer the tools to do that. I like your phrase of like people nurturing themselves down the funnel. It's a more empowered buyer. Imagine an agent who can not have to disappoint the customer by spending time taking them to a house that like didn't work out or was not the right one for them. It's like you can avoid all that waste.
Well, that's such a good segue for this, because I want to, how do you balance the different needs of this? You're obviously you have agents that purchase products from Zillow and obviously lenders and everything else. And then you've got the consumer, and I've been in this my whole life. And those two things don't always line up. Like what the agent or the brokerage wants is not always what the buyer and seller wants. How do you segregate? How do you separate that? How do you balance that? Like I heard a long time ago, never actually got to ask this. You guys had personas inside the company. You had names for people. You do. Okay. So can you talk about a little about all this?
Yeah. And I'll push a little on your question, because I don't actually think delighting the consumer is in conflict with delighting the agent. I mean, I'm sure we can come up with some edge case examples, but we fundamentally believe that empowering the consumer is empowering the agent. And I think maybe because Zillow has had such a strong, the consumer is our North Star, the buyer and seller is who we build for kind of first and foremost. I think some in the industry say exactly, James, what you just said. Well, that must mean you're not for the agent or you don't care about agents. And the reality is that couldn't be further from the truth. And the reason is because to build that super app we talked about, you have to have a even better real estate professional that can work with that modern buyer and seller. And so consumer empowerment is agent empowerment to us. And actually, Keith just gave that example, right? The consumer is sort of nudging themselves down the funnel to become more transaction ready. That's great for an agent. That's a higher intent lead. That's a more educated buyer. In all these regulatory changes that have come, a more educated buyer on how commissions work means that the agent who actually is better at selling their services wins more often, right? They take more share versus it's just happenstance and people just hire whoever, right? So almost every time you see a more empowered consumer, a more efficient consumer, it ends up being a better experience for the agent to either meet those folks or be more efficient. And then on the flip side, you asked, how do we balance it? That's part of why, yes, we spend a lot of time building for the buyer and seller, but we spend a ton of time, as you gave some examples earlier. I think we spent probably billions of dollars over the last decade plus, either building and developing or buying and integrating software for real estate agents and teams. And that software isn't just behind some walled garden that's only available to agents that work with Zillow consumers, right? Zillow buyers, sellers. That's software that's available to agents to help them power their teams and businesses, no matter who they work with. They might work with their sphere or competitors' leads. And the reason for that strategy is really this rising digital tide lifts all boats. You can't get to that super app that we talked about earlier if agents aren't using digital CRMs and agents aren't using digital document signing and agents aren't managing their showings digitally with things like showing time and allowing buyers to book tours the way you'd book a restaurant on OpenTable. You have to build all these services to bring it from offline to online so we can build this digital transaction. So that's how we think about it philosophically. All of that is in service of the buyer and seller. But to get the buyer and seller what they want, we have to have super agents, not just agents.
And which can, to the uninitiated or to the knee-jerk reaction agent, right? It can feel like you're starting to do some of my job, right? A little bit, maybe.
I can see how that's a misconception, right?
Well,
but that's similar to saying, like, does the internet replace a lawyer, right? It's like,
which
no.
The answer
right?
is no.
Does it elevate what a good lawyer is? And do sometimes customers walk in with like bad legal advice from the internet, and a lawyer has to show their value by saying what you read is wrong, and here's how you should think about that. But it elevates the profession, and I think that's what the internet and the mobile phone and now generative AI are doing to the real estate industry. They are elevating the real estate professional.
Yeah, that, like, you don't want to WebMD your symptoms, right? Like,
but we all do.
We all do. So I would love for you, if you feel comfortable, and you can also say, Keith, like, I'm not, so let's keep it moving, which is okay. I get told that a lot. If you had an opportunity, you have a microphone, right? And a couple of people listen to this podcast. For an agent who maybe feels that way, like talk to just them right now if they're listening, and maybe explain to them like sort of what you just said, but to them. How would you try to help them understand really how you are positioning this for the good of the industry and for the good of the agent?
Yeah, I mean, I would speak even less from Zillow's perspective and just from technology's perspective.
Even better. Yeah.
Today's innovation, we were talking about catching rockets. Like today's innovation is tomorrow's table stakes.
Right.
And that's what technology does. We discover something new, we show our friends, we go, wow, that's really cool. And then we wake up very quickly and we expect it to work that way, and we expect it to be the default in the category. That's what the internet, the mobile phone, technology have been doing for decades now. And we talked through some examples already of that in the real estate industry. You know, once you see a showcase listing, you don't want to go back. Once you can book a tour the way you'd book an open table restaurant, you don't want to go back to the telephone game where you have to call someone and figure out a time and do a bunch of schedule coordination as a buyer and seller. By the way, the agent doesn't want to either, right? Do I want to spend time coordinating with the other side of the transaction on schedule management? Or do I want to be advising my client on whether they should buy this house and how much to offer? So technology pushes the consumer forward, and not just in like innovative ways, in like it moves the bar.
Right.
And so one has to keep up with where the buyer and seller is going. And that's really our mission at Zillow, is to help agents figure out where the buyer or seller is going and help build them the tools to get there. And, you know, technology and change can be scary, and it can be hard, and people have hard jobs and they're really busy at what they're doing. So, you know, we have a phrase at Zillow, we say, we do tech so you can do real estate. I think that'd be my comment is, you know, let us do the tech, right? You don't have to go be well-versed in all of the things that are coming. Just try the tools that we or others are providing and lean into learning how to use these tools, because it's what your clients, what your customers are going to want.
Right.
You know, Keith, to add on top of that, just, I always like this. So Zillow was founded, Jeremy, in 2005. Did I get my number right? Is that,
launched in early 2006. That's right.
2006. Okay. So, in 2001, if my number is correct, somebody can correct me in the comments at some point later, because y'all like to do that. I believe in 2001, use of a realtor on the buy side was 69% of the time.
Yeah, sub 70. Yep.
Yeah. So today it's like 88, 89% of the time.
Yeah.
And so if you think about the advent of, you know, Zillow was launched in 2006. Zestimates weren't there. There was no way to do any of that online. Realtor.com was out, but it was still infancy. My point is, all of this tech, all of this innovation, all of this data, all these things that weren't there, everybody kept saying for as long as I've been in this business, which is my whole life, like it was going to replace the realtor. And ironically, the use of realtor has only gone up. Yeah. So like
we do, you can read our housing trends report. We do a housing trends report almost every year, and we publish a bunch from it, and not just use, but desire to use and desire to use by the younger segments goes up. So it's not like, oh, the category is just aging and the new tech consumers, they're going to be different. No, again, the more empowered consumers are, the more they just want the services to work the way they want them to work. And that includes your professional. They want a great professional to do a great job for them. But to your point, James, it's more now than it ever has been. And that's because of the internet.
Right. Yeah. The human brain, given too much information, chooses nothing. Right. Well, and that's when you start to lean on and want guidance and someone to help shepherd you through
I'm pretty sure I call my doctor more than I used to because of WebMD, because every time I get sick, I think I'm dying of something. And so like, he's like, James, stop calling me. I'm like, I swear to God, I have this now. And he's like, you know, all right, let me do a few other, I'm going to leave that one alone.
Me too.
Few other questions here. I just want your take, just because I have been saying publicly, and I think this is interesting to me, is, and I don't know what you can share or not, but I've always found Glenn Kelman to be very interesting. I love him. I think he's eccentric and funny, and he's just he likes to take big swings, using your comments. Yeah. Redfin's whole business model originally was around employee-based agents to control this experience, like to create this better real estate experience. And they pivoted quite a bit now to Redfin Next, where they're going to be more traditional. I'm saying publicly, like, people aren't paying attention. I think this is a big thing. I think that brokers should be paying attention to the fact that he's going to go head to head now with all of these traditional companies in the process. Do you have any thoughts on this transition? Just curious. For Redfin is obviously a big real estate portal too. It's my opinion, the best brokerage website in residential real estate for brokerage. Any thoughts? Curious.
I mean, I can't speak for what they're doing or what they're saying inside their walls. What I can say is our strategy, and maybe picking at what you're surmising, is the best agents out there don't have a one size fits all approach. They work for all different brokerages. They have all different approaches. They are entrepreneurs building their own practices, teams, cultures. And that's been our strategy for a long time. If you actually look at the history of even Premier Agent in the early days, before we got into everything we're doing now, it was, again, working backwards from what the buyer and seller wants. They want a great agent, and a great agent looks differently at every team or in every neighborhood or given their own experiences. These are incredible professionals that have found their own way and want to build their own businesses. And so I think the idea that, that's been our philosophy. And I think you're seeing, again, with all the changes in the industry that are maybe going to create more dispersion for consumers picking and being able to pick great agents more often. I think you'll see that even more. I think you'll see what makes a great agent is not a one size fits all approach.
Yeah, sure.
Which, and from our standpoint, like, that's music to our ears. We've been building on that philosophy for a while, and we keep getting reinforcing data points from buyers and sellers when we ask and inspect and talk to them about how it's going with their agents.
Yeah. Well, here's something I know you both are aligned on. Let's go to some controversial stuff, because it wouldn't be our podcast if we didn't.
This is James's favorite part of
I know,
podcast.
but like, look, nobody wants to hear like the want to hear some juicy stuff. So look, Glenn, you, Susan, Keith, and I, a lot of people are talking about, CCP right now. So clear cooperation policy, and then pocket listings. You've written an op-ed on it. I've seen Susan written an op-ed on it. Glenn's written an op-ed on it. You guys we're all, I think, very aligned on this. Let's talk directly to people. Talk to us about your interpretation of CCP, like your thoughts on it. You can kind of go through your op-ed for those who haven't read it. We'll put the link in our show notes. People can read both yours and Susan's as well. I've been extraordinarily vocal that this is a very serious thing that, like, we need to be paying attention to. So I'm going to turn it back over to you. Give us your thoughts on this this whole conversation.
I think first, it's important to state that everyone in the industry benefits from transparency. Yeah, that's something that we were founded on. As you said, back in 2006, we were founded on the principle of turning the lights on in real estate. An open, free marketplace. It benefits everyone, consumers and agents, right? It benefits sellers, buyers, and agents. And we have a lot of transparency in this market, in the US market, that we don't have in any other market. I know, James, you've talked about that as well. Yep. And I think it's easy to take that for granted, but go try and buy a house in another market, and it is a much harder thing to do for the buyer, for the seller, and for the agent. A big part of that is listings access, things like clear cooperation that ensure that the vast majority, if not all, listings are available to buyers and sellers, provide that. And private listing networks and the removal of CCP are bad for buyers, bad for sellers, and bad for agents. And it's kind of one of those things where, like, I don't really see a pro con here. It's just bad. The only thing that it's good for is maybe folks being able to fracture listings access and use that to build a different business or charge more for people to have access to those networks. So, in our view, again, as consumer empowerment, transparency focused folks, this seems pretty cut and dry. It seems like our industry wins when agents can compete fairly and freely, right? When they earn business based on the value they offer, not because they're members of our private listing club. And obviously there's all kinds of data on how it's better for buyers and sellers, right? The idea that a buyer couldn't see all listings, that a buyer would have to pay for access to a listing network, the idea that a seller is not told that if they forgo open access, they're leaving money on the table. And so a fraction of sellers, less than 1%, might want to do that, but no one's told that. Like it's pretty hard to be pro consumer and pro private listing network.
I said the same thing the other day. I'm like, if people just want to be honest and be like, look, it's about capitalism and revenue, just say it for God's sake, and like stop saying that you can't conflate the two. They're either pro consumer or you're not. I want to ask something that I think is important for everybody to hear. And I want to be clear, I've not prepped Jeremy with this question at all, to be clear with this. You guys moved over to listing database, getting all of your data from listings from MLS 2017. Do I have that right?
Yeah, somewhere around there. Yeah.
Okay.
For a long time, we built our database via broker and agent.
That's what I wanted to talk about.
Feeds. Yeah.
Yeah. So you used to get the data from us and others and everybody else, and you guys got massive amounts of shit because the data would be inaccurate, it was outdated, the property wasn't actually for sale. I remember these conversations, and it's because you had hundreds and hundreds of databases. If CCP gets removed, then what does that mean? Like, are we going back to that? Is that like something you'd have to look at again? Like, I'm just trying to frame this up that all these complaints even the industry had went away when you pulled data from the MLS. It's a great marketplace. Yeah. Everyone's working off
a clean reservoir of
data.
It's
the same database that's on an agent website. It's what's on your website. So like, tell me what that looks like. Maybe give some historical perspective, because I had to remind somebody this the other day. I said it's like 40% of the industry is new in the past 4 years. They don't have historical perspective on the way things were. They're only seeing things from what they know today. So like, what would that world look like if we went away from MLSs having all the data and you had to get it somewhere else?
Yeah. So the quick history lesson, you're right, is for a long time, we got our listings via brokers and agents and tried to basically simulate or get to the same amount of listing completeness coverage. And a big reason for that was there are some rules that have since started to move away that we didn't like. We don't like the idea that you can't commingle other types of listings, right? It's, whether that's for sale by owner, but more often new construction, you want to be able to show the buyer everything.
Right.
And you also want to be able to give the buyer all the data. The idea that you could say, well, we can't display this data because it might look bad. It's like transparency is better. It's like, it's better for the buyer. It actually ends up being better for the seller because you get to better price discovery faster, right? So the big part of why we didn't join the MLSs was we were trying to build the most complete database. But as you said, we found that you couldn't get to the last all 100%, right? And so to get a complete repository, we couldn't try and simulate it. We had to actually join the MLSs and take them via IDX feeds, and then just work on the rules that are not very pro-consumer. And to the industry's credit, they're really moving in the right direction on a lot of these rules. Like commingling is being relooked at, and many MLSs are removing it because it is good to show the consumer everything. So that's the history lesson. And I think if we end up in a world of fractured listings, we will work really hard to make sure we can show the consumer the most complete picture of listings.
Yeah. And it's what I think people lose sight of, because we get sort of mired in the technical aspects and technology and all of those things are super important. But if you boil it down to its essence, the human being who buys a house just wants to go online and see the houses that are for sale. We can complicate it with all these fancy words and structures and MLSs and data sharing and blah blah blah, but they just want to see what's available for sale. That's all they want.
And by the way, we ask that. It seems obvious, but we still ask it in research. 90% of buyers say, "I want to see all the listings."
Right.
It seems obvious, but it's not just your conjecture. It's like you can ask a buyer, and that 90% of buyers say, "Yes, of course, I want to see all the inventory so I can be more educated and informed, so I can hire a great real estate agent that works for me."
Yeah. I've got a question for you that mostly just because you have access to data, probably unlike anyone else, right? You have more eyeballs on your website when it comes to residential real estate than any other company in the world. So is there a data point that you're like, is there anything when you look at the numbers that you're surprised by? Or you're just like, wow, I didn't expect that, or that's pretty cool, or whatever?
I think the thing that always surprises me, you brought it, we talked about it earlier, Keith, that when you make it more efficient for the consumer, they just take that incremental time and they plow it back into research.
Yeah.
I think that's the, and you brought up your family that's not planning to move, but they spend all their time on Zillow. People obsess about this category. People obsess about this category while they're buying, and they obsess even more after they bought. You kind of like check back in and you go, did I make the right decision? What came for sale this week? So this thirst for knowledge and thirst for content and data and dreaming that the consumer, the buyer and seller has in this category, it's not surprising when you say it, but when you see it in the data, you're just constantly reminded. And I think it just goes back to what we talked about earlier, that just means that if you give the buyer and seller the ability to walk themselves further down the transaction process, they're just a more empowered buyer and seller when they choose to hire an agent. And the reality there is that means they're going to hire the best agents. And that's the thing that we're starting to see is this continued evolution towards the professional, the best real estate agents, building businesses, winning more share, delighting more customers. This professionalization of and up-leveling of the industry is happening. It's happening in real time.
Yeah. Yeah. So just quick for the audience, James's power went out. So I
was looking around. I'm like, all of a sudden I'm just talking to Keith. So.
Yeah. So I finally have the reins all by myself. So we're going to go another hour.
You can ask whatever you want.
No, I'm just kidding. We actually are. I want to be respectful of your time, and we're close to the time you've allotted. So I'll ask you the question that we always ask everyone at the end. If you were an agent or a broker, what's the one thing you'd implement today to help drive your business forward?
We hit on this earlier, but it's really just leaning into all the new tech that's coming.
Yeah.
And I recognize that's hard, right? Like your jobs are busy. All of our jobs are busy, but making sure you have great software systems in your office so that you can take advantage of these new capabilities, whether it's Gen AI coming to your CRM, right? Whether it's things like Listing Showcase from us or from others, leaning in to try these things and to try and take advantage of these things. That's the one thing I would do. Again, because we talked about it earlier, it goes from novel to expected really quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't usually do this, but I have a follow-up if that's okay, because James left and I have the keys to the kingdom. I've said into this microphone multiple times, I think real estate agents are in general, this is a gross generalization, which means you're immediately wrong, but they're brilliant humanists and average at best technologists. And so because I agree with you that the pace of change in technology is exponentially increasing, especially with AI and some of the things that are coming. For any industry, for any human who thinks of them, maybe knows in their quiet moments of thought that they aren't a great technologist, what advice would you give someone who is struggling with processing just this change in technology? As someone who lives it and breathes it and thinks of it every day, for you, it might feel, it's just natural, right? But for someone else, it could feel unnatural. How do you start to be comfortable with that? What advice would you give someone?
I think two things. One, if you buy or try the right tools, they can hopefully teach you, right? So, not to stump for our own tools, but
go ahead.
One of the things that makes Follow Up Boss so great as a CRM is
it's intuitive.
It's so intuitive.
Yeah.
It helps you. The onboarding process is fantastic. Just sort of discovering missed folks in your sphere to get started and organizing your database. Like great tools ideally help teach you, so you don't have to feel like you're going back to school to learn how to do something. So I mean, which tool you pick does matter.
Right.
And then, something we do a lot at Zillow is just be willing to try and fail at things. Be willing to try things, and I'll try it with one customer or one listing appointment and I'll see how it goes, or I'll ask someone on my team to try something and report back to me. But just experimenting is a really good way to lower the fear wall and just try something. And maybe you'll try it and it works great. Maybe you'll try it and it doesn't work, but you learn something from that failure so that if you try something different the next time, you're further ahead. Yeah.
The learning curve with technology, usually if it's good technology, is steep but short. Right. And so you just got to get your way through it. So, Jeremy, thank you so much for the time. We really appreciated having you on. We look forward to having you on again sometime soon. Yeah. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Thanks so much.
It's our job to say out loud what everybody's only thinking to themselves. It's your job to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode.